step up while you're out, and your teachers can help you. Check out the website for more info on how to get over a concussion and get back in the game.
So what do you guys think? Is it too babyish for your age group?
I thought it was fine. You really liked it.
That was good?
I liked it.
They hired video game designers to design that, to try to make it intriguing, and I've mostly used it for 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. But you guys think it's okay for your age group?
Yeah, it's alright.
Yeah. Did you guys, anybody learn anything new from that?
I did. I didn't know you can not get hit on the head.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
I didn't know you would like
That's how I got mine.
be crying across that.
Yeah, across the.
Yeah.
But then
So you guys did really well on that. Those are all symptoms of concussions. You guys
Figured.
called it. You guys called
Figured.
it. But
I
yeah,
still
those are all
did it.
symptoms of concussions. But on the other hand, if I gave you a slip
was for
of
myself.
paper and I asked you to write down how many symptoms of concussion, most people will get like 3 to 4. And that's one of the things as a concussion educator. So there are about 27 signs of a concussion. You cannot remember them. And so when I go out and speak, I give these CDC flyers to parents and kids, and I'm like, put it in your glove compartment. Because it's usually in your car where you end up talking to your parents if you're kind of trapped in the seatbelt. You got to talk to them, and the Wi-Fi connection's not there. So if this is in the glove compartment, parents can take it out, or there's really great iPhone apps that have it. So that's the problem about concussions. There's so many different kinds of symptoms that you can have. There are also 11 signs and symptoms where if you have one of the 11, you should go right to an ER, which are different than the ones on that piece of paper. So concussions aren't something where you can memorize like all good dogs go to heaven and you have to pull out the symptoms. It's really something that there's some people will have one of those symptoms. You may have someone that's incredibly dizzy after a concussion but doesn't have a headache. You may have a headache after a concussion but not be dizzy. You could be completely nauseous. So that's why you really, if you think you have one, really need to have somebody trained in evaluating you. And as an athletic trainer, I don't know how many coaches here are trained. I assume that they are because your athletic trainer and athletic director are very into concussions. A school nurse or your local doctor. So next what we're going to do is I'm going to have my friend Megan, who is an AT, tell you a little bit about her concussion experience, and then we'll come back and get into some more details.
So as she said, I'm an athletic trainer. I went to school for 5 years. I have my master's in athletic training. Like, I should have all this down, right? I learned how to handle concussions. I learned how to evaluate what to do when athletes have them. You know, everything from the nausea and vomiting to what happens when an athlete is unconscious with a concussion. Like, I got it, okay, that's what I do. Until it happens to me. So, September 21st, I was at football practice, normal day at work, and I got hit in the back of the head with a football. And I think almost immediately I knew. I was like, oh, seriously? Like, me? I'm supposed to be helping people. Here I am. I'm running through tests on myself, and they're all coming back positive for a concussion. So I was in Westport. I live about an hour away from Westport. I drove home. Shouldn't have drove. Couldn't see straight. I had tunnel vision. All the normal symptoms that I would be like, we need to call your mom. You know, you're not driving. I drove. People with concussions, the biggest thing that any concussion expert will tell you is when you have a concussion, you don't make smart decisions. Your judgment is completely impaired when you have concussions, but you don't know it because you're concussed. So I drove home. I went to an urgent care center. They said, yeah, you have a concussion. Go ahead and take the weekend off. Go see your doctor on Monday. I was like, take the weekend off, please. Went to work on Sunday. It was hot, 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 hot. And I was working a football game, a youth football game, and, you know, it was an 8-hour work day. I didn't feel well in the morning, but I was like, no, I'll be fine. It's okay. By the end of the day, I couldn't see straight. I could hardly walk. My headache was unbelievable, but I was fine to drive. So I drove home again, and come Monday, I went to stand up. Went to stand up and get out of bed. I have a carpet on my floor. I looked at the carpet and almost instantly wanted to vomit. I was like, this is not normal. Like, something is wrong. So I went to work and ended up leaving work early and going to see a concussion specialist. Actually fell asleep in her office because I was just done. My body was just absolutely, you know, in shutdown mode. And she was like, yeah, why are you here? Like, why are you working? What are you doing? You know better. And I did, but I was stubborn. So, you know, me not taking that weekend off resulted in me being out of work for 6.5 weeks. Now, I think, as cool as that sounds, like, oh, you didn't have to work for 6 weeks, that's awesome. No. I couldn't work, I couldn't text, I couldn't be on the computer, I still can't read. Even now, I've been back to work for 3 weeks now-ish. Covering basketball, when they're doing ball handling, dribbling, drives me nuts. I have to leave the gym. I can't deal with the sound of like 8 basketballs at the same time. The lights, that's not so bad because half these lights are turned off. Lights still bother me. And that's something that I will probably deal with for the next 3 to 6 months, if it even goes away. Because I didn't take that time off, my sleep pattern is terrible. If I sleep for more than 2 hours straight, it's like remarkable. Unless I'm having a headache, and then I could sleep for 16 hours, which is not advised. You know, I still have headaches. I didn't take it seriously. It wasn't, you know, I can't get a concussion. I'm an athletic trainer. I don't have time for that. But it's so important. It's so important to recognize and rest and do all the things that you're supposed to do. Because I missed 6.5 weeks of work. I just graduated in May. Like, I was still in my probationary period. And I have to tell my boss I can't work for 6 weeks because I messed up and went to work early. Like, it's not worth it. And the psychology behind it, you know, I studied sports psychology and how to help student athletes through the depression and the, you know, emotional problems that are associated with injuries, especially like concussions. Because the major thing with concussions is you don't have a brace, you don't have crutches, you don't have a cast. People think you're fine. Most of the time when you have a concussion, you can have a normal conversation with somebody and people are like, why aren't you working? Why aren't you in school? You're fine. But you're not, you know. So the psychology that goes along with it is incredible. And I was trained in how to deal with all those things. I was trained in how to, you know, talk student athletes out of the depression that they're gonna, you know, come into, and all of the relationship issues with their social life and their teachers and their family. But when it's when it was me, I went through unbelievable depression to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. I was hysterically crying because I saw like a Hallmark commercial. Like, really unnecessary. And, you know, the emotional roller coaster was incredible because I didn't do what I was supposed to do from the beginning. It made it so much worse. So it's so important. Like, I'm telling you from experience, it's important when you have these things, you need to tell somebody. The worst case scenario is you're going to be like, oh, I got hit in the head and I don't feel well, and you're going to get tested and not have a concussion. Great. That's amazing. I would rather test 100 kids and have none of them come back with concussions and spend that time and thoroughly doing the checks than miss one kid who did have a concussion because they didn't want to say anything. Because the aftermath is not worth it. Not at all. So that's my advice to you. Don't be shy. Step up and say something.
Like Megan, I also made some really bad decisions. Knowing all I know, I was up at Yale coaching a boys lacrosse game, the Eli tournament, and a ball came from the field, hit me right in the eye, dropped me. Both teams took a knee, and no one would get up until I got up. And I was lying there like wanting to crawl under a rock. Like, the last thing I wanted is 2 teams taking a knee all looking at me. And they wouldn't, so I finally got up. They took me to the med tent. They're like, we think you're concussed. They're like, do you have a ride home? I'm like, yes, I have a ride home. Completely lied. I did not have a ride home. But I'm like thinking I'm going to leave my Suburban up at Yale. So I got in my car and I drove from New Haven back down to Norwalk. Luckily I didn't have kids in the car, but I know better than this. I completely lied to them. The decisions that you make, you're still talking, you're still walking around, you don't have ooze coming out of your head, but you make poor decisions. So that's when we're saying, put your hand up in a game if you don't feel well, if you're at a party and you fall, tell someone. Probably not going to do that. So what we're also trying to say is if you see a classmate, if you see a teammate, if you see one of your friends fall at a party, that's when you have to go over and you have to do that assessment, because in that moment you're the expert. If you're with 15 kids and everybody's drinking and somebody falls and you go over, you're the expert in that moment. You're the one that's going to get help. Yeah, you're not a doctor, you can't diagnose anything, but you're the one that may make the difference. And in all the studies that I've seen, including a new one, only 20 to 25% of concussions happen in sports for kids. So that means that we have 75 to 80% of concussions are happening outside of sports. What are you guys doing? You're driving, you're fooling around, you're partying, you're just being silly, you're deciding to show off and do, a dance step in the hallway. I mean, this is what, I have 3 boys. I had 3 brothers. I know what kids do. So, this is all focused on sports right now because that's sort of the hot topic. But most of the concussions that are suffered are outside of sports. And those are the invisible ones we haven't counted yet, and we haven't even addressed those yet. So, we're talking about concussion as a change in behavior, right? All those things that I gave you were change in behavior. The CDC form here says that a concussion is an injury that changes how the cells in your brain work. And what that is what's actually happening in your brain is that when the head shakes, the brain's going one direction, hitting off the inside of the wall, and the other direction. So you've got this moving. You saw where that brain goes back and forth? There's no helmet, there's no headband, there's no equipment we have right now to stop the brain from floating and rocking inside the skull. So you want to wear helmets in football, and you want to wear helmets horseback riding, and they're very good. They protect you from skull fractures, but there's nothing out there. And especially when they send girls out in soccer, they've had 4 concussions with those headbands. They're supposed to reduce the blow. There's no evidence that those work. And I've talked to so many girls that have gone back to play soccer thinking that they were protected, and they weren't. So when that brain goes back and forth inside, it causes a chemical change. And this chemical change starts the second you get a concussion, and it goes for about, they think, depending on the person, 12 to 16 to 18 days. They're now thinking it might go 3 months. So what happens is when that brain hits, when that cells have a chemical change, there's membranes inside the neurotransmitters, and the chemicals kind of switch. They go, sodium and potassium switch across the membrane, and they change from about 200 to 500% of what should be there. So these chemicals change. Blood flow to the brain for the first half an hour spikes. That's where you get hit and you jump up and you want to fight somebody, you want to get away. Usually people with concussions have a boost of energy right when they happen. Only 10% will actually go unconscious. So 1 out of every 10 people will have unconsciousness. So you get that spike, and then it drops off, and then the blood flow to the brain for the next 12 to 18 days is half of what it's normally. What the body has to do, it's like, let's say we have blue marbles over here and white marbles over here. And in a concussion, they shook, they're all thrown on the floor. The brain has to pick up each marble and put it back where it's supposed to go. So it's work. In addition to going to school, in addition to doing homework, in addition to texting and watching TV or playing Xbox, the brain's got to do this process. And I already told you the blood flow to the brain is half. So that blood flow is